Hi everyone, I'm here with a great friend of mine and a colleague, Dan, and he has done years of mountain rescue in Colorado. He's a doctor, a GP, and in a previous life was a scientist dealing with climate change and looking into that. But Dan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Manda. It's great to be here. So I had a previous life as a climate change research scientist and spent some time on ships and planes in remote parts of the world chasing the data. But that was mostly in Colorado. And while I was in Colorado, I joined a volunteer mountain rescue team. And it turns out it's one of the busiest mountain rescue teams in North and South America. And over the course of a decade, I ended up on probably over 600 mountain rescues, sort of multi-day searches. There was some disaster, national level disasters that we responded to. And yeah, and after a while, I began to realize that these rescues, yes, it needed medical people, it needed technical people, but there was also a little bit of sort of psychology involved in making sure these rescues happened. So my interest in all of the rescue stuff then led to me moving back to Australia and heading to medical school. And then in the last few years, I've got through med school, got through my GP training, and now I'm teaching with the University of Tasmania, the expedition medicine work that we're involved in, and
Marine
kind of
medicine.
just and the marine. I'm calling it mountain expedition medicine and then marine expedition medicine. So so I do a bunch of GP work, urgent care, starting some emergency work. So but yeah, it's sort of I went to medicine to combine this love of the outdoors and rescue and then this new field of medicine that was just intriguing to me. So that's my basic story.
Fantastic. So I want to start at the beginning of your story with the mountain rescues. And I know what it takes to mountain rescue on small mountains, which is all I've been able to do on those huge mountains in Colorado. And as you said, huge disaster zones and going out searching for people for days on end. I guess they prepare you with wilderness first aid, remote first aid. Was there any preparation in terms of psychological first aid when you were doing that?
Oh, absolutely not. No, it was the kind of, when I arrived over there, the situation was that if someone had what you now consider a psychological sort of stress type injury, it was sort of mostly just told, just to, just suck it up. Like, yeah, that sucked. Let's just move on. That quickly changed, though. There was a change afoot when I was there. But there was no terminology for it. There was no sort of format or structure that we could follow. And some people just had a natural and a knack to it, right? To follow up with you to say, hey, you doing all right? That was a pretty gnarly call. But it was never consistent, and if the right person wasn't there, then you might sort of be on your own. But I guess one of the points is it's not just the psychological stress on you as a rescuer, but it might be on your colleagues, or it might be on the patient, or it might be on the friend of the patient that witnessed it all. And so the dimensions to it were quite significant in terms of what you might be exposed to and what you might have to deal with in any one rescue. But it's what I love about the evolution that we've got now of some really good models on how to simply address, recognize, assess what's going on psychologically in these extreme places.
Yeah, which is, quite timely because it's so needed. Because I don't know about you, but I felt like I learned a lot of this stuff through trial and error. You mentioned before, the friend, and that's the person that's often forgotten. I remember in one of our first major incidents on a super yacht, we had a multi-trauma. There were quite a few casualties. Luckily, we didn't lose anyone overboard and no one died, but It was close. And when I gave everyone a job, I quickly put the spouse of a person. He didn't need airway support, but she was at his head providing emotional support and keeping him talking. And she was well trained. You know, she'd done all the courses. And I suddenly looked over and went, "Oh my God, she needs to be treated for shock." Because you could
Mm.
see that she was thinking, "Oh my God, who's going to look after the kids? Who's going to pay the mortgage? Who's going to go to work? Are they going to have to take his arm off?" Like, and I suddenly realized I'd made one of the biggest mistakes ever. You know, in a controlled environment, like when I was working as a paramedic, you'd never get to say a tennis court where someone had had a heart attack and ask the wife of the person to be his support person. But in this
Yeah.
scenario with your crew, it, you know, and I thought, okay, note to self, never do that again. But a lot of the time we don't look at the friends or the children and their wants and needs.
Mm. Yeah, I think it's also important to sort of realize that we never know exactly what is going to be a positive psychological impact or a negative one. And while I was thinking about, you know, our discussion tonight, it came back to me a story of one particular rescue that was just so clear that the psychology was the most important dimension to the rescue. And we got called up into the mountains, you know, in the sort of in early winter kind of time in Colorado. And this woman was out hiking with a couple of her friends, and the trail was icy. She slipped and she broke a leg, and she was so distraught by the physical injury, but she was also distraught because she didn't know how on earth she was going to get herself out of this situation. And her friends finally convinced her that she should call 911 and get the rescue team going. And I turned up on scene. It was probably I don't know, it was probably 45-minute hike into the mountains. I turned up on scene probably fifth or sixth, and it was just an absolute calamity. You know, there was nothing seemed to be going right, and this woman was so distraught. She was sort of crying. She was, you know, apologizing for getting all these people involved. And when she saw more people coming up the trail, it just got worse. And as the field team leader, I was like, something is not right. And I walked up to my friend who was standing right next to this woman. I said, you know, "Hey, Darren, what's going on?" And as soon as that woman heard my Australian accent, everything changed. She's like, "Oh my God, you're Australian? Oh my God, I had the best year of my life when I was 18 in Melbourne. Oh, where are you from?" And so my entire role on that rescue was to talk with an Australian accent for the next 3 hours. And after that, everything went completely smoothly. So even that one little incident for me, you just never know what your role is going to be. And then if you can realize that a little bit of that psychological input is necessary, you can start doing the little tests to see, do they need a physical touch? Do they need a kind word? Do they need someone just at their head saying, you know, it's explaining to them what's going on? Do they just need a little bit of warmth from a blanket and someone sort of tucking them in? So you can't know what the exact piece of that trick is going to be, but you can sort of see when something is needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And since you've been self-taught and had these experiences, have you done any courses in psychology, mental health, or psychological first aid that has made a difference to the way you would practice now compared to how you practice then?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, going through medical school, they teach you all the standard stuff, right? Um, the the methodology behind CBT and or the cognitive behavioral therapy and that kind of stuff, and that is helpful. But it really comes down to, I think it really comes down to starting to apply it in different ways and in different situations. And I developed a psychological first aid course for the Australian Ski Patrol Association, and it wasn't until I started delivering that material that I started to get the feedback from people in terms of how they can apply the structure that I was sort of teaching, how they would apply it in their own little world. And so I think what is so important in this discussion is that we can present the basic structure, and we can give our hints and tips, but we need to be able to open it up to that individual and say, but this might not be how you apply it, so you do it in your way. And because like medicine, like I guess physical medicine, yeah, we all know, what you have to do for if someone's septic, right? There's a pretty established pathway to follow. But if someone is psychologically injured, you just never know what exactly is going to be that best component to, or that best tool to use. And so the courses that I've done related to psychology, they've all been really helpful, but it's sort of taking an awareness and applying it on a regular basis to see what sort of works for you, and to get the experiences of others that I've found has been the most valuable.
Absolutely. So on that note, if I asked you to come and help me prepare a crew that was, say, 12 people heading down to, let's say, through the Northwest Passage, they're going to be away for a few months. A lot of them haven't left the Mediterranean before. A lot of them are young and haven't been away from home that much. There is going to be some rotations, but people are going to be a long way. We're going to have limited comms. Everyone thinks that we have communications all over the world, but sorry, kids, you will not have access to, I don't know, Threads or Snapchat or whatever those things are. They're probably too young and cool for Facebook, but maybe even Facebook. That will not be available. You might be allowed to have a call home to your parents or partner once a week. We're going to have to limit that. Also, we have to take into account that a lot of us, like to relax. So, it doesn't mean you go to the pub every night. You might really rely on that 5-kilometer run you do every day. You don't even think about it until it's taken away from you. You might actually really rely on those podcasts that you're streaming or the YouTubes you're watching until it's taken away from you. You don't realize how much you were being busy. And sometimes I find in yachting, everyone thinks we're going away to these amazing locations. Well, if you're in the laundry, even if you are outside and you've just got to keep shining and polishing things, it's the monotony. Even you could be in the most beautiful place in the world, but it's the monotony. And then in your downtime, not having access to the gym or running or Wi-Fi or other people. How would you prepare us for that trip?
Yeah, well, I think in terms of, obviously the most important thing is to bring those people together and identify the priority as creating a team. And, I think in terms of, and you're going to do that for anything, right? For the physical training of at a particular event or an expedition, you're going to hopefully get those people together, and you're going to reinforce the success is based on how the team performs. But in terms of the psychology side of it, there's two things that I think are, and again, it comes from my experiences with rescue. There's two things that I would talk about. Is the first one is about the need for circuit breakers, to be able to recognize when and it's the need for circuit breakers and for the permission for other people around you to kind of break into what might be biased thinking or focused thinking that's not helpful. And so in Glenn's discussion, he talked about this idea of the fast thinking that we have, that can take little bits of information and form a picture. And that fast thinking utilizes all of our experiences, but sometimes it can lead to biases. And so what we need to be able to do is to break into that fast biased thinking and say, hang on a minute, there's something I need to I need to spend some more energy on this and slow my thinking down. And there are ways that the ways that you do that, there can be many, but it might just be, if someone's a little bit distressed, you say, put your hand on their shoulder, look them in the eyes, and create a break in this sort of fast pattern. And so, and it may be that as a team, you say, look, we've had some significant change, a phase change in our environment right now. We all need to stop. We all need to take a deep breath, and we need to think this through slowly. And so gathering people together and explaining the need for those circuit breakers, then the permission to have your colleagues, your teammates actually walk up to you and say, I think we need to slow this thinking down, Dan. I don't think that, I think that this is a little bit, I think we're running away with the fast thinking. We need to slow it down. And so in a team training environment is to actually say, we need everyone to give permission to allow other people to break in and to slow that thinking down. And so, and it might be, again, like as an example, it may be that in a stressful situation, you can say, hey guys, we've just hit, I think we're heading into the red stress levels here. Some of us are looking pretty stressed out. Let's stop for a second and take a break. And so you can imagine that if someone walked up to you and just pointed in your face and said, you're crazy, you're going off, you're not right, there's something wrong. But if you do it in a pre-planned way, and you do it in a nice, respectful way, and recognize that this pre-planned circuit breaker kind of technique is for the betterment of the team, then I think you can really, you're hitting the psychology on the head. You're respecting people, and you're breaking these fast systems of thought to be able to get rid of those biases and lead to a safer environment.
I'm so glad you've talked about this. Yeah, it's something that we don't think about enough, I think, is the bias, and to encourage people as well to reflect on themselves. How often have you had an idea in the heat of the moment, and then you reflect and you're like, that was out of character for me, or it was that true? Was that really true? Who would I be without that belief? Like, what if, was that actually necessary? Was that real? Or was I on an adrenaline high, to encourage that type of reflection, especially as a team and with the individuals.
Yeah. And I think that in terms of your question about how would I do that over a course of 3 days, the really important thing is to get people in an environment where they can be comfortable with each other, and then you can establish the team-based approach on how you're going to deal with certain things. And one of those certain things is this, elevated stress levels or psychological kind of stresses. And so it's really about settling people into a comfortable place, and then getting buy-in from everyone to say, yep, in this situation where everything's calm, everything's good, I'm giving you permission to walk up to me, put your hand on my shoulder, look me in the eyes and say, Dan, I think you're hitting the red here, mate. Do you want to take a step back and talk about it? So that for me that's one big one. The other one is a term I've taken from a good friend of mine who's an emergency doc and mountain rescuer in Colorado, is beware of the good idea fairy. So everyone has this little fairy that sits on their shoulder and says, oh, this is the better way to do it. This is a really good idea. You should put that idea into the mix because that's way better, and it's going to make you look really important. But the reason that we need to listen to our good idea fairy is two simple things: to basically look at a situation and say, is what's happening safe, and is it getting the effect that we want? And so if you look at a situation, any situation, and it's safe and it's effective, then you can push your good idea fairy off your shoulder and tell them to bugger off. And so this idea of a good idea fairy is sort of is another way to break into this this sort of self-importance that we can apply to ourselves and say, well, I'm an important part of this team. I know what I'm doing, and I have this need to be right. And so, but if you can back away and say the most important part of any team interaction or anything that's happening is that it's safe and it's effective, it's getting the job done, then there's no need for any more input, because it just makes things busier, it makes things more stressful, and it can lead to friction, more interactions, if people just keep throwing in their little good ideas from the good idea fairy.
I love that. That's absolutely huge. And I'm also feeling like my good idea fairy is often a little out of control. So I've learned something there. Fantastic. Well, so that was the first and second. Is there a third?
Look, I think the one of the journey that I went on with this psychological dimension to my mountain rescue career and subsequent expedition medicine, that journey took me down the rabbit hole of survival, and literature on survival. Like what confers an increased chance of survival in a really crappy situation, and one of those is sort of a conscious exposure to the forces of nature or the stresses that you might be exposed to. And I think that what I've seen with our marine expedition medicine course and the mountain expedition medicine course is that it doesn't take very long. It doesn't take very long. It just takes a little bit of creativity to push people into a zone of whether it's, sleep or temperature or sort of communications or whatever. It doesn't take long to push people into a zone that they're not used to, but in a safe way. And so if you can push people and expose them to a graded approach of the forces of nature or the stresses of the situation, then you bond that team really, really quickly. And so on a 3-day kind of thing, like you described, what I would be trying to do is some really gnarly scenarios that are kind of outside the realm of what you might even expect. But if they're crazy enough, they're safe enough, you're going to get people into a headspace that really gels a team quickly and can help build a little bit of that flow that we've you've been talking about in these other videos. So it's and those scenarios can be fun, right? You can make them really, really quite fun, but you can still push people into a realm of being exposed to consciously exposed to these stimuli that are going to be helpful, once you get into the real situation you're in.
That's awesome. And I absolutely agree with you. When you start talking about teamwork, and I'm a huge believer in studying with Steve Kostler and the Flow Genome Project at the moment to understand how we can flow as high performance teams. But one of the things that, we talk about at the university in expedition medicine and marine medicine that I don't hear, I've heard it spoken about in the military, but everyone these days talks about leadership, but not a lot of people talk about leadership and fellowship.
Yep.
So could you talk a little bit into this, because it's really important in extreme, harsh, remote environments to not have too many cooks, to not all be leaders. How do you feel about that?
Oh, don't get me started. Oh, you have got me started. Here we go. No, look, I think the first thing is you need to define a difference between leadership and taking charge.
Yeah.
So there's a big difference between those things. Taking charge it may need to be done in certain situations. It may need to be done very forcefully to get something done quickly, or it may need to be done really casually. But taking charge is very, very different than leadership. And leadership can be followership. If you're in a situation and you see that something needs to be done, you can step up and say, hey guys, this is going to be helpful to our situation. Why don't we go about this? And being part of an effective team, following that direction, is being a leader. It sets an example for other people that might be wondering what they should be doing. But sometimes, if someone, and in my rescue situation, like, there was so many incredibly competent mountain rescuers, and if I turned up on scene last, I knew that these guys had the job taken care of. And if my colleagues saw me fall into a followership, that just removed one extra stress, because they knew that I wasn't going to be they knew that my good idea fairy wasn't going to be throwing stuff in, and they could rely on me as a follower. So I led the way by following in those situations. And so I really think that the term leadership is all encompassing, right from the point of from that one side of taking charge to the other side of followership. And if you can't do the followership, then I don't think you'll ever get effective respect as a take charge person.
Yeah, thank you so much for defining that, and I totally agree. And I think you would agree that the more people I train, the more experienced the person and the team, the better followers they are.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is, you talked about flow. Like, that's what when a rescue went so well, it just felt like we were the champions of the world. And that was when people were following. It was when people just slotted into roles that they knew needed to be filled without being told, without having to be directed, or they just slotted in and did the grunt work, the really, the stuff that just had to get done, but wasn't it wasn't the fancy stuff. And so that's what I think creates, in a team environment, that's what creates those just glorious senses of a high functioning team, is when people fall into that followership with absolute delight.
Absolutely beautiful. Yeah. And that is when a team gets in flow. I found with the teams I've trained, and I'm sure I've experienced with you, doing our freshwater and open water exercises. Sorry, my doorbell keeps ringing. I'm just going to pause this and get it. Do you mind? Okay, so we've been talking about leadership and followship and flow. And I'm wondering, well, I'm sure you had this in mountain rescue, and I've definitely experienced this with you when we've been doing our inland and offshore water expeditions, is that what I find amazing is when you've got a well-trained team, that you can actually have a real life emergency and it doesn't even seem real. Everyone just takes their place and it just happens so naturally. Have you experienced that with mountain rescue and the expeditions you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really clear as day to me when I think back to some of the rescues that I went on those rescues that were like that were just so slick that it felt like it was the easiest day out training. And then there was other times where it was, for some reason, it just wasn't clicking. And if I think back now, what I noticed in those times was people having the ability to take that step back, take a deep breath, to walk up to the person who's maybe a little bit kind of in that sort of fast thinking phase, put the hand on their shoulder and be willing to calm things down, be willing to take that step to say, hey, it's all right, we've got this covered, you can calm down a little bit. And so it was those leadership styles of quiet leadership, and that sort of displaying of the competence, that just made those things go so well. Because when you walk up on scene and someone's got their hands in the air like, oh my God, this is a disaster, it creates another stimulus that triggers your own fear center. But if someone's standing there, it's like, yep, this is what we've got. This is a hurry up. This is a trauma red. We need to get this moving really quickly. Dan, can you go and get that evacuation line sorted out? It's like, yep, I've got it. And it just takes away one of those added pieces of stimulus that is not going to be effective in most situations. So it's that quiet competence and quiet leadership or followership that I think does it. And sometimes you need to be able to sometimes you need a circuit breaker for yourself to be able to pull you out of that slight panic and put you into that quiet sort of followership or leadership phase.
And bringing it full circle, it's so easy for us as medical trainers, rescue crews, super yacht crews, people that are used to training for disasters in remote and harsh environments, to practice medical emergencies, fire drills, man overboards, all those things. Sometimes we forget to practice the psychological first aids and the aspects of resilient leadership, which is something I've noticed working with you, is that you're really good at doing briefs and debriefs. And do you think this should become a standard part of our training, whether we've got trainers involved professionally or we're doing it ourselves as teams and crews? When did you start really advocating? And because I've actually noticed you stand up and really encourage a brief and especially a debrief after a scenario.
Yeah. Look, it's probably been it's been the last 4 or 5 years that I've been on this journey of discovery. It's sort of this accidental psychology journey that I've been on, and every time I discover something new, like we were talking earlier about, the discovery, like you're reading the Wim Hof book and that breath book and all these other things, and all of a sudden you have these new little things that you can just add in and try, and so that's effectively what I've been doing. But honestly, one of the most clear examples of this happened on the expedition medicine course that you were part of last year, where on the days that you were helping out on that course, we presented the simple model of psychological first aid. It's like, are you in the green? Are you in the red? Or are you in the orange? And so what we did on that course was every morning we'd wake up, we'd have breakfast, and we'd sit down and we'd just get everyone to close their eyes, and we'd say, if anyone is not in the green, just give us an indicator. And it might be like a little bit of a wiggle of the finger. It might be that they just nodded their head. No one else knew that this person was identifying themselves. But that gave us an idea on a number of things, like how many people were not in the green in this stress continuum. Were we pushing people too far? And identifying those people that we could walk up to in a quiet moment, in a private moment, and say, hey, what's going on? How can we help? And so I think, again, it's like, if you can get your team to agree that we know the system, the green, the orange, the red, and that terminology is agreed upon, you can easily walk up to someone and say, hey man, it looks like you might be progressing towards the red. What's going on? Is that the case? Or you could do a daily briefing and use a similar tool like that. So with that simple terminology, and you can start, it gives people permission to kind of start using it, and before you know it, it takes off, and it's amazingly helpful.
And so simple. When I first started using it in the coaching space, I could not believe how simple it was and how easy it is for participants to adopt and to just say, hey, I'm having that ability to reflect on themselves and to say, am I green, amber, or red? And then be able to come to you and rather say I'm feeling this or that, or bring stories in to say, I think I'm like orange going into red now. I couldn't believe the power it gave people to express themselves and their truth.
Yeah, absolutely. It just, and if you think about it, it just takes off a cognitive load from someone trying to explain to you that you're in this weird position stress wise. It's like, oh, well, I was stressed out because of this, and now there's this other thing and some people might not know what's actually stressing them out. But if you can offload the cognitive burden and have someone be able to walk up to you and say, yep, I'm progressing to red, I need your help. Easy. It's an easy step to take, isn't it? Rather than trying to explain to someone, explain to you or and someone else all of the details of what's happening and what you might be experiencing.
Absolutely. And I hope, if nothing else, everyone listening takes that golden nugget away and brings it into their environment, whether it's a yacht crew, a rescue crew, a mountain rescue crew, an expedition, adventure sport, or even just in your family. It can make such a difference. Dan, I could talk to you for hours and hours, and we will continue this conversation. Thank you so much for your time. And on behalf of all my community and everyone in yachting that have had the privilege to meet you today, thank you. And we will be back with more info for you all soon. Thanks, Dan. You've been amazing.
You're very welcome. Thanks, everyone.
Enjoy Kashmir. Dan's on his way to Kashmir.
Will do. I need to get some mountains, some thin air into my lungs.
Get some thin air before he goes to Antarctica. Such a well-rounded life. Thanks, mate, and we'll see you soon.
No worries. Sounds good. See ya.